Welcome to Black on Black Sports. I'm your host, Pharaoh Ellertine. Thank you for watching. Today's presentation is about Frederick Douglass Fritz Pollard. Fritz Pollard was the first black coach in professional football in the United States and also the first black quarterback in professional football here in the United States. So sit back and enjoy this presentation. Some 27 years before Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball, Fritz Pollard was the best player for the first NFL champions in 1920. In a decade during which hundreds of African Americans were still being lynched, he was playing the white man's game when the NFL was in its beginning stages and was extremely brutal. Frederick Douglass Fritz Pollard was born in 1894 and was raised in Chicago, Illinois. The Pollards were well known in Rogers Park, a suburb on the north side of Chicago. Pollard's barbershop was a popular neighborhood hangout, and the Pollard boys played football for hours in the local park. They were the suburb's only black family. Coming out of the Reconstruction era, which followed the American Civil War, the Pollards wanted to live free from the racial oppression and segregation laws in the South and had moved from Oklahoma in 1886. Mother Amanda was a respected seamstress, while Father John was a successful businessman. After escaping slavery, he had fought for the Union during the Civil War. Born Frederick Douglass Pollard in 1894, after the abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass, his nickname Fritz reflected Roger Parks' predominantly German makeup. During high school, Pollard was actually a better baseball player, but he knew he wouldn't be able to play baseball because at that time black players were banned from that sport. American football was different though. His three older brothers all played the game and felt black players could do well if they adhered to an unwritten code of conduct. They taught Fritz that he could never retaliate, despite the provocation he was sure to face. Fritz was gifted with speed and elusiveness, but he was small. When he began playing football at the age of 15 in 1909, he measured 4 foot 11 inches and only weighed 89 pounds. His brothers decided they had to toughen him up. They knew he'd be targeted because of his size and his skin color. All 8 of the Pillar's children graduated from high school and excelled at athletics and music. The family had prospered. Their move north had paid off. Fritz, the standout achiever, earned a Rockefeller Scholarship at Brown University, an Ivy League school in Providence, Rhode Island, on the United States East Coast. Everything he learned from his brothers was about to be put to the test. Pollard was one of the only 2 African Americans at Brown in 1915 and the first to live on campus. When he showed up for football practice that September, none of the players wanted him on the team. Bloody Wednesday was the scrimmages where reserve players would challenge starters for a spot on the team. When an opposing linebacker greeted Pollard with a deeply offensive racial slur, he responded by waltzing past him and into the end zone. Pollard asked to run the play twice more and scored 2 more touchdowns. So the linebacker told the coach, "We better play this guy." At the age of 21, Pollard was only 5 foot 8 inches tall. That's pretty small for football, even then. On the train out west to Los Angeles, even black porters refused to wait on him. The same players that shunned Pollard 4 months earlier were now bringing him food. They also threatened not to play when he was denied a room in L.A. Eventually, the hotel relented. For the game at Yale, Pollard had been smuggled into the stadium via the separate gate. It was one of the many measures he'd take to avoid being targeted verbally and physically by fans and players alike across the game's heartland of the American Northeast and Midwest. The Yale supporters also turned Bye Bye Blackbird, a popular song of the day, into a racially abusive anthem. Rival fans would taunt Pollard with it throughout his career. In the 1916 season, Brown beat Yale and Harvard on consecutive weekends. It was the first time a team had beaten them both in the same season, and Pollard won each game almost single-handedly. Brown finished with the 8-1 record and their star player selected in the All-America team. Pollard left a lasting impression in Providence. There are 3 awards in his name at Brown, and in the 1970s, when his grandson Fritz III played football there, a local shop owner refused to take his money and said, "My father took me to see your grandfather play. It was the best game I'd ever seen." Academic difficulties meant Pollard's college career was cut short. In 1917, he was listed in the Army, serving as a physical director in Maryland while coaching at the all-black Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. The U.S. summer of 1919 was known as the Red Summer. Race riots took place across the country. Hundreds of black people were killed by white supremacists. Some of the worst violence took place in Pollard's hometown of Chicago. Pollard himself was now in the factory town of Akron, Ohio. The new owner of the team there had got in touch with him. His professional career was finally about to begin. At his first game, he had to get dressed in the owner's cigar shop and was abused by his own team's fans. In his second, he faced future Hall of Famer Jim Thorpe. As a Native American, Thorpe had battled racial prejudice to become a multi-sport star. Yet, he welcomed Pollard with a highly abusive racial slur, saying he was going to kill him. Pollard told him, "You'll find me down there in your end zone." Pollard and Thorpe were pro football's highest paid players, the main attraction. Still, many were motivated to see them by the opportunity for abuse. The following 1920 season was the first for the American Professional Football Association, renamed the NFL in 1922. And the Akron Pros went undefeated, outscoring their opponents 151-7. Pollard was the only Akron player named in the All-Pro side, but when the team received their championship trophy, he wasn't invited. In 1921, Pollard was made player coach and finished as the league top scorer. He could do everything. He played on the offense and defense, as well as being a running back. He was a defensive back, a receiver, a kicker, a punt returner, and a kickoff returner. Then in November 1923, after switching teams, he played an entire game at quarterback for the Hammond Pros. It would be almost a half a century until the NFL had another black starting quarterback. In his 7-year pro career, Pollard played for 4 NFL teams plus 2 in rival leagues in Pennsylvania. Segregation laws had been abolished in the northern states, but with many Southerners migrating for work in the rubber factories of Ohio and the coal mines of Pennsylvania, he continued to experience racial discrimination almost everywhere he played. As his team returned from one game in Gilberton, the train windows got shot out. He couldn't eat at restaurants or stay in a hotel, Pollard told the New York Times in 1978. He said, "Hammond and Milwaukee were bad, but never as bad as Akron. They had some prejudiced people there, and the opposing team gave me hell too." Teams would take kickoffs short so Pollard could be gang tackled as soon as he received the ball. If the field was quagmire, his face would be held in the water. But he combated such treatment with tricks he learned from his brothers. When returning kickoff, he'd often dive to the ground, leaving the tacklers to collide with each other before getting back to his feet and continuing to run. When he was tackled, he'd flip on his back and pedal his feet in the air to stop the opponents from piling up on him. Pollard ended his playing career in 1926 at the age of 32. He continued to promote integration of more black players. He coached and managed all black teams in exhibition games, giving them a chance to showcase their talent. By February 1933, there had been 13 black players in the NFL. Fritz III said his grandfather felt there were two reasons why he wasn't voted into the Hall of Fame during his lifetime: George Halas and George Preston Marshall. Halas was involved with the Chicago Bears from the creation in 1920 until his death in 1983, first as a player, then coach and team owner. Marshall was an avowed segregationist who owned the Washington football franchise from its inception in 1932 to his death in 1969. He called the team the Redskins in 1933, a racial slur that was eventually dropped. Both he and Halas were at that meeting of the team owners in 1933 when Marshall pitched the idea of banning black players. With the U.S. in the depths of the Great Depression and millions of white people unemployed, he argued that paying black men to play football would be a bad business move. Pollard felt Halas held a personal grudge going back to when they were high school sports rivals in Chicago, and that he also played a prominent role in the ban being approved. For decades, the team owners claimed there was no unwritten agreement. The NFL has now acknowledged it did exist. It didn't end until the Los Angeles Rams signed Kenny Washington in 1946, and the NFL wasn't fully reintegrated until 1962. Marshall's Washington team was the last to sign a black player after the government threatened to revoke the team's lease on their publicly funded stadium if they did not. Pollard became the second African American in the College Hall of Fame in 1954. But when the Pro Football Hall of Fame opened in 1963, he was not among the charter class of 17 inductees. 5 of the 11 men who agreed to ban black players were actually on the list, though. At that time, Pollard was 69 and the owner of several business ventures. After his playing career, he moved to New York with the Harlem Renaissance still in full swing and had become a talent agent, booking black entertainers for films and white nightclubs. He opened the Suntan Studios, where the likes of Duke Ellington and Nat King Cole rehearsed and produced music videos called Soundies. He funded a newspaper and set up an investment fund and a company trading coal. He later worked as a tax and public relations consultant. If anybody had the right to be angry about the way he was treated, it was my grandfather, and he never showed it, said Fritz III. He always let his skills on the field and his actions off it define who he was. That's something that was drummed into me. After Pollard, the second black starting quarterback was Marlon Briscoe in 1968. His case is typical of the process called racial stacking, which still influences the number of black head coaches we see today. Briscoe passed for 14 touchdowns in 1968, and that's still a Denver Bronco record for a rookie. Yet the next summer, Denver held quarterback meetings without him, and he asked to be released. He never played quarterback again. African Americans have historically been drummed out of the quarterback position and shifted into more athletic positions like wide receiver, defensive back, and running back, says Professor N. Jeremy Duru of American University in Washington, D.C., one of the leading experts in U.S. sports law and discrimination. Offensive coordinators tend to come from quarterbacks and head coaches from offensive coordinators. So the pipeline is thin for African Americans because of the discrimination against black players in so-called thinking positions. When the Los Angeles Raiders hired Art Shell as head coach in 1989, he was asked in a live broadcast how it felt to be the NFL's first black coach. And he said, "But I'm not." The first was Fritz Pollard. Fritz III recalls, "You could see all the reporters going, 'Who's Fritz Pollard?' They had to cut to a commercial, and then my phone just blew up with people saying, 'They're talking about your grandfather.'" Pollard had died just 3 years before at the age of 92, but so many people were only hearing his name for the first time. So finally, in 2005, Frederick Douglass Fritz Pollard was inducted to the NFL Hall of Fame. Well, I have to admit, I was amazed when I did the research on Fritz Pollard because not only was he the first black coach and quarterback in professional football in the United States, but he was an excellent baseball player, and he worked at the beginning to help start the Chicago Blackhawks, which is a hockey team. Fritz Pollard is a treasure, and it's very important that stories like these are told and shared so that we can keep the history of black athletes alive. Many of these athletes struggled because they were playing at a time of heavy racism. So please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and make sure that your family members, especially your children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews, are able to see this information so that we can keep our history alive. And remember, rest at the end, not in the middle.